Alrighty, welcome in everyone to another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is July 2nd around here, It is July 2nd. We are 53 days from college football kicking off, and we got a couple of things to get into today. Apologies for a little bit of the absence, dealing with some personal stuff, but we won't waste too much time on that because we got plenty of other things to talk about. We'll do a little bit of kind of a catch-up show. A lot of stuff has happened since the last time that we have talked. Definitely want to get you guys updated on all of the different happenings from around college football, and then starting on Monday, we're going to get really into the weeds. We're going to start getting into talking about this upcoming season, sleepers, players to watch, transfers that were huge for their teams or will be huge for their teams in this upcoming season, and about a million other things. So we got a lot of stuff coming down the pipe here pretty soon, but did want to give you guys a little bit of an update of where we are right now, how we're moving into July and moving into this 2025 season. And the biggest thing is the House settlement has officially passed. That is the biggest news that we have found over the last little bit in sports. Frankly, the biggest news in college sports in a really long time. It totally changes the way that athletes are going to get paid, totally changes the way that recruiting is going to work, and that's something we'll talk about here in a second, but it's a huge step in the right direction. A lot of different things have to go correctly, and another thing that we'll talk about here in a second, but the reality is this is a big time step forward for college sports in general. We'll just have to see how it all kind of comes into play this year. But let's get some basic facts out of the way. Then we'll talk about kind of the effect on recruiting and NIL and how that all that works. And then we'll kind of talk about just is this going to work? Is this going to be something that is going to be able to be enforceable at the way that they want it to? That's kind of still up for debate, and we'll figure that out over the next year or so. But at the end of the day, let's start with some basic facts, some basic details of what is going on. And if you've kind of had your head in the sand for the last little bit, no big deal. We got a ton of stuff coming down the pipe for you. That should be $2.8 billion, but $2.8 billion will be paid to former athletes that did not get to partake in NIL. So that's kind of where this all started. It was a couple of former athletes that claimed, we could have made X amount of dollars if we had the ability to participate in NIL the way kids are today, and they weren't given that opportunity. So they want a little bit of the back pay, and that's something that is going to kind of come to fruition over the next, I believe, 10 years is when that payout's going to happen. The reality is there's not much to worry about if you're a college football fan with that. That's just kind of something that's going to be happening kind of in the periphery, not super important to what's going on in the world of college sports today. What is important is the $20.5 million that can be distributed to current athletes. And we'll talk about a lot of the money that has already been spent in that regard, because a lot of NIL deals went out this past month just to get in right under the nose of a lot of this NIL go and a lot of the different, College Sports Commission, that thing down there. All the NIL deals that are over $600 will have to be cleared by a clearinghouse that is run by Deloitte. It is a lot of different things, but essentially just confirming that the deal meets the fair market value. If it's not enough, if it's too much for what you're doing, that will obviously be kind of where they step in. Will be an interesting thing to watch. There's no doubt about that. What Brooks Austin calls the head fed over there is going to be someone that we're going to hear a lot about, and people probably aren't going to like too much. There's going to be a lot of back and forth, a lot of confusion, but in terms of that $20.5 million that is being distributed to current athletes all over the country, the likely split as of right now, and there's been a couple of different ideas. I know Alabama had a very interesting idea that might push a little bit more towards the non-revenue making sports, but as of right now, it seems about 75% of that money, so about $15 million, is going to find its way to football, 15% to men's basketball, 5% to women's basketball, and then 5% to kind of be split among the rest of the sports. Obviously, the non-revenue making sports were going to be the ones that got hit the hardest, especially when Title IX was decided it's not a huge deal in this scenario. That's still kind of being litigated right now, so that's something to watch. But overall, this is something that I think all of us kind of expected, especially if Title IX was not going to be involved. It was going to be really hard to keep that money away from football. So a lot of it will go towards football, but everyone is getting a little bit of a pay bump overall, and that will be a great thing for college sports. Just got to make sure it doesn't become so much of a return on investment type approach that you start cutting the sports that aren't quite giving you what you gave them from this kind of settlement. So that's something to watch. That's something that obviously will kind of take shape over the next 18 months, and we'll see if that really does come to fruition the way that we're all expecting it. If, a couple of sports get cut off in the next couple of years, a lot of that stuff will kind of be decided behind closed doors, but it does feel like there's quite a bit of push to make sure that there is enough money going to the non-revenue sharing sports. But in terms of college football, there are scholarship limits, or excuse me, scholarship limits have been eliminated officially, but there are roster limits now. And for college football, it's 105. It sounds like these are going to kind of get phased in over the next couple of years, so it's not like 20 guys at every single college football program around the country are now looking for a spot to play sports or even to go to school. At the end of the day, it's going to take a couple of years to get to that 105 number, but that's where we're getting. And you'll probably find that pretty much every one of those 105 players are on scholarship. That's just kind of gonna kind of be the way it goes. Hopefully that kind of spills over into other sports. You see all the baseball team have scholarships instead of 11.7, I believe was the number around baseball the last little bit. So a lot of different moving parts around this. Obviously it'll affect other sports a little bit more than college football in some respects, but there's quite a big effect here, and there's definitely some big things to watch for. The biggest thing that I've noticed, even over the last 2 weeks, and even over the last week or so, is the effect on the recruiting. Recruiting trail has been really busy the last little bit, and we'll get into that a little bit more detail on Monday. Georgia's doing just despicable things to every other team in the country right about now on the recruiting trail, but at the end of the day, recruiting will not be defined as much by NIL. I want it to be very, very clear when I say as much, because the reality is there will still be those guys. There will still be guys that are saying, I want to make as much money as I possibly can. I want to make money and be starting. There will always be those guys. We're never going to get out of those guys. There were guys before NIL that had that approach to college football, but we're going to get back to kind of relationships and development and the place mattering a lot more, and you've already kind of seen it take place over the last couple of weeks, particularly when you talk about the NIL side of things. Now, the big thing to keep in mind here is all of these rules just went into place yesterday, I believe, so everything is finally getting checked by NIL Go, by the College Sports Commission going forward. There was a lot of NIL money handed out during the month of June. I believe the number was 824% more was given out this June compared to last June. So everyone's trying to get their money in when they can. When it's unregulated, when it is the Wild West, they want to make sure they pay out that money. Now, could cause some problems on the back end because you have a lot of money tied up with these players right now. How do you handle that when new players try to come in the door and you have to pay them? I think that's something that a couple of people are struggling from, particularly Ohio State right about now. Just feels like there's quite a bit of money tied up with Caleb Downs, tied up with Jeremiah Smith, tied up with these really elite players that you're more than happy to give the money to, but it might be hurting them on the recruiting trail just a little bit right now. That is something to watch over the next little bit. It'll all work out for Ohio State. I promise Ohio State will not have a problem here, but the reality is there's a little bit of a tiptoeing going on between teams and general managers and everything just to make the money work, because it is little bit all over the place right about now. But recruiting's going to sort of at least inch towards what we used to have, which was a relationship development-based recruitment that wasn't defined by who's the highest bidder. That happened a lot over the NIL era, and it was something that was really exhausting for a lot of people and something that took people totally out of recruiting. Even when you signed the paper, it didn't feel like you were fully a part of the team until I saw you on that field. And then at the end of the year, you're holding your breath once again because transfer portal has come into play and people will contact you even before that came into play. And that's something actually we'll get into at the very end of the show. But the reality is, this will make this more about relationships, development, and less about the dollar amount. Because the reality is, you can't have a team offering $1 million and then another team offering $4 million. Because the team offering $4 million has to make it all work for the rest of the guys as well. And it's not just the Wild West where you can throw money and say, he's going to go here for an hour on Tuesday, and I'm going to give him $100,000. That's not going to work anymore. So a lot of different things have happened over the last couple of weeks, and we really will see the kind of the impacts over the next 18, 24 months, where we really see how intense of a change this is. Is it really still just a bidding war, or are we kind of going back to the way recruiting was, which is the way I wanted, is the way that I think a lot of people want? It was something that Josh Pate talked about on his show. Just has a different feel about recruiting this time around than it has the last couple of years, and I love it. Recruiting is so much fun to me. I was still very much into it during the NIL era, but I fully understood where people were coming from when they said, is this really something that we want? Is this something that is going to, work out in the long term? It definitely wasn't. We finally have that kind of out of the way, and we're able to move forward with hopefully the recruiting that we all love, and the recruiting that got us very excited every single summer, every single winter when you're going into National Signing Day. That's kind of what I want, and just feels like we're going to find our way back to that with this new revenue structure. Obviously, there will still be those outliers, but feels like recruiting is finding its way back to what recruiting should be, which is development, relationships, and not so much the bidding war that has been the last couple of years. But the other part of this is this enforceable? That's probably the biggest part of this, if we're being totally honest. You can pass all the rules you want. You can put in the head fed, as they're calling him over there in the Phil Guy Network. You can do all of that stuff, and it can be all look really, really good from the outside looking in. Do you have the ability under law to enforce these rules? Because that's been the hurdle for about every single the last 3 years. It's been a huge, huge hurdle to figure out. Our NIL rules are one thing, but then state rules are another thing, and then federal laws are an entirely different thing. It is a very, very tough thing to figure out. Now, it feels like most teams are, I don't want to say rolling over, but falling in line, let's say. It seems like most teams understand that these rules are going to be in place going forward, and they're trying to get everything kind of in check. I know Georgia's doing that right now. I know a number of other teams are just trying to kind of play within the boundaries, because if you play within the boundaries now, you don't have a problem in 2 years when these rules are actually enforceable, and then they can come back and kind of get you on stuff that you did now. So it feels like most people are falling in line. That being said, why I have Tennessee up there, they're not necessarily causing a huge stink, but Tennessee state laws are kind of the big time thing here, and the thing that was talked about most readily when the House settlement was officially passed was Tennessee state laws are a little bit more lenient. They're a little bit more, do what you need to do, shift money around. The government's not allowed to look at, that market value and decide whether or not it's fair for what you got. That wasn't really in place, or isn't really in place in the state of Tennessee. Will the College Sports Commission kind of supersede that? Can they supersede that if the government does not get fully involved? Now, they're involved, here and there, but if the government does not give them the antitrust exemption, is this all in place the way that it needs to? Is this enforceable in the way that it needs to be? Or is it still kind of the Wild West with just a little bit of a facade that looks a little bit nicer? Is it a really nice looking house from the outside, and then you walk in and it's been just torn to pieces? That's the question that you have to answer over the next little bit, and it's not going to be an easy one to answer. We're going to find out probably over some lawsuits. We're going to find out over some messy things, but at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind here is this sport has been broken. There's no two ways about that. I think everyone understands that this sport has not been operating the way that it should, or the way that is healthiest for the fans, for the players, for the coaches, for the sport as a whole. It has not been operating the way that I don't think any of us want it to be operating the way it has the last couple of years. So we're taking a step in the right direction. We have built the foundation of the house, and now we got to build the rest of it. We got to make sure that all the rooms are in place. We got to make sure that there's no mistakes. We got to make sure there's no loopholes. There's no holes in the wall. There's nothing that can go wrong with this, because the reality is this is a massive step in the right direction. If you didn't like all of the NIL payments and the bidding wars that happened in recruiting, you should be very happy about this. If you don't want college football players to get paid at all, you might want to find a new sport, because the reality is they are going to get paid. They're going to get paid quite a bit of money, frankly, because they bring in quite a bit of money to those schools. So this will be a battle back and forth. There's still a lot of stuff that has to happen for this to be enforceable, for this to be put in the place that we all want it to be. But the reality is, this is one of the bigger things that has happened in college sports in the last 80 years, if I'm being totally honest, since they've signed those media deals for college football, for college sports overall. This is probably one of the bigger moves in the entirety of college sports history. We just got to hope that it works out the right way. And there's a lot of different people that you have to rely on to make that happen. There's a lot of different people that are going to have to do their jobs very effectively. And we'll see what happens over the next little bit. We'll see if Brian Seeley gets a little bit too many lawsuits on his desk, if, these aren't enforceable laws. All of that will kind of come into play over the next little bit. But as of right now, feels like everyone's fallen into place, and it feels like this sport is inching its way back to being the sport that we kind of all love, and being the sport that is played on the field and not talked about endlessly, talked about NIL and all of the different stuff off the field. So we're getting back there. We're finding our way back. It's not going to be perfect right away. It's going to take some time, but it really does feel like everyone's on board for this. Feels like it's the best thing for everyone involved, and we just got to hope that we stick the landing here. That's going to be a really interesting thing to watch, but let's take a little bit of a break here. When we come back, we got to talk about the CFP changes because there's a lot of different stuff going on for 2025 and then beyond is the real debate that's going on, but we'll give you all the updates that you need to know right after this, so stick with us.